All right, so this is our last week in the ethics course and our last lecture, and we're going to be talking about stem cell research. That might be a little unfamiliar to many of you. I actually have a daughter who is going to be, well, at least is a candidate because of her condition for, and she's 40 in June, and this is 2021, depending on when you're listening to the video. She's a candidate for a stem cell therapy, and so it's sort of important to us as her parents and as her other siblings and family members to know what are the ethical questions, what are the ethical considerations around stem cell research. As you can imagine, I would say over the last couple of decades especially, there's been a lot of discussion in the scientific community, in the Christian community, of course, about all reproductive technologies, all bioethical issues, what we call bioethical issues, the relationship between scientific advancement when it comes to the human body, things that you can do, whether on the reproductive side, which would be in vitro fertilization, things of that nature. What are the proprieties involved in that, especially with frozen embryos, and what happens to the embryos that are not used, and just a whole range of issues. I can remember back in my undergraduate days, which would have been in the mid-1980s. Seems like forever ago, I know. But in vitro fertilization was just kind of getting ramped up at that particular point. You know, how, and so you deal with the ethical issues and some of the motivating features behind couples that if they could afford it, it was pretty expensive, still is today, avail themselves of such things. Should Christians do that, given some of the implications of it? So it's not always just the direct use of something or the viability of something, or as consequentialists would point out, or utilitarians especially, the utility of something, because it is claimed that something could solve this issue, therefore good or a moral good attaches to it, or if it's legal to do that, if the government pays for it or endorses it, so on and so forth. Then you attach a moral good to that. So obviously it's much more than that, because during the original in vitro, what used to be called test tube babies, when actually it's a petri dish, and the egg is fertilized outside of the womb to then be later implanted. It's what we might have called, maybe not in such technical terms, artificial insemination, where you are, fertilizing outside the womb and putting that. Actually, it's a little bit more than that. Never mind. But more than one embryo then would be fertilized, or more than one, I should say, egg and sperm would be fertilized, and more than one embryo created. And so you may have multiple embryos, and sometimes in the process multiple embryos are implanted, and because of that, sometimes you'll see twins being born, triplets. You'll see, some where to solve the fertility problem, it is gone beyond just a single baby at times. And so what is put out there as an inducement to this is the notion, or at least maybe where you could make an argument that it's a moral good, is well look what it can do to help infertile couples. And so there's just many infertile couples, and so there are always those techniques to try to help either increase mobility if it's on the guy's side, or any number of things. I don't want to get into a whole lot of detail here, but this could help. So if it could help, then it must be good. Well, some of the ethical issues then had to do with what about the number of embryos and what happens to those. So they would be frozen, and there would be embryo banks, and these would be frozen for up to 5 years in case the couple wanted to come back, in a couple of years, and perhaps, another child. So that opened up a range of options for parents, that is, parents of embryos. Parents of embryos. And what to be done with those. If we understand that life begins, if we take that position that life begins at conception, you have embryos, presents a whole range of interesting ethical questions, right? And so this takes the abortion question and pushes it back, doesn't it? Pushes it back from within the womb, and what happens to the fetus, the child in the womb, if it's now the embryo outside the womb, and if in fact our claim is that life begins at conception. All the conception material contain all the chromosomes, all the DNA, and so on, that will eventually mature into everything is there for a mature, a fully grown human being. And so we're not going to get into that whole discussion, but I think you have some of the tools to work through that, to work through some of those issues. Hence, just like with the abortion issue, there are adoption agencies where there will be funding if it's a crisis pregnancy. Let's just say, what I mean by that is maybe even if it was a rape or incest or something violent that was perpetrated against the woman, or if it was an unexpected teenage, some encounter and there's no money, it's poverty, something. So whatever makes it a crisis. And there are Christian organizations that have come along, and I've pleaded in secular state university classrooms and said, don't do the knee-jerk reaction. Don't act in haste. Don't act out of emotion. Yes, something has happened. It's can be something somewhat extremely traumatic to a person, especially if it was violence was involved in it, or it was some unexpected something, right? And so I said there are Christian organizations. There are organizations out there that will actually fund your pregnancy if you would just, and then help you with the adoption if you're not going to keep the child, unable for whatever reason. Anything to avoid the destruction of that child. And the same thing then flipped over to the embryo question. It's like, well, there were those that were putting their embryos up for adoption, and it's actually possible to infertile couples to adopt an embryo. Of course, it won't be their genetic material, but it will be someone else's. But nonetheless, it's like adopting a child. It's not your DNA. It's not biologically your child, but you certainly can love that child, give that child a home. And so there are wonderful, wonderful outcomes, especially for believing families to be able to have children that biologically they otherwise could not. And instead of a moral something that was a morally inappropriate choice, that is of destroying an embryo or destroying the child in the womb, some positive outcomes can come of that, certainly. So as you can see, the world is full of, we're focusing on the big targets, but the world is full of ethical choices every single day. And even as you've had this course for 8 weeks, and you have somewhat of a new understanding, certainly not a thorough understanding, but a new understanding and some tools by which you can work through ethical questions. Everything is an ethical issue. Everything. When you watch your government and you see what's going on with your government and decisions that are being made, try to isolate an ethical theory. I mean, utilitarianism is so popular today. We make the decision based on its utility. The greatest amount of good. What will this do to create the greatest amount of good to the greatest amount of people? But then you have to step back from that utilitarian, somewhat utopian concept and say, but who makes the call? Who makes that decision? Can I decide based on that? In this particular act, what's going to produce the greatest amount of benefit to the greatest amount of people? Or is that already decided for me? And one of the things you'll find with governments, even our government, if you follow through and go back through previous administrations, back, and just see the decisions that have been made, the legislation that has been passed, the Supreme Court decisions, and in all range of these types of changes to our society based on legislation and based on executive orders, based on Supreme Court decisions, and even bring that down to the state level and the same process within the state. And you'll see that each and every one has an ethical sort of value. If you had to place an ethical number on that, what is the ethical value of that? And then to determine its appropriateness or inappropriateness. And how would you do that? How do these decisions impact? And we see in recent days with so many trillions of dollars going out there, and you think, well, but so many people were unemployed and this could help them. Or yes. We understand that, right? We understand that there's a need to provide help. And when you're providing help, that isn't the time when people are in duress, when there's difficulty, when they're out of work, when they don't have food and basic necessities, can't pay their rent. This isn't the time to pinch pennies. This is a time to jump in there and help them. But then what happens when you look at the entire bill, the entire act, and the multi-trillion dollars, how much of it is actually going for that? And in order to get that money to those people who are in need, it's going to have to be filtered through how many different agencies that all take their piece and their piece and their piece and their piece. How much aid really gets there. And you have to ask about the ethics of a lot of these things. And we as Christians, above all, this is something that are sad to say in our day, though our government often ethics is just a word. But for Christians, on the other hand, ethics is something that we should be highly concerned about. In our own personal life, our families, in the workplace. And you're going to find it challenging as you go forward. And some of you perhaps already mid-career working out there, and you now see what your company does with fresh eyes. You see the policies and procedures, and many of them put in place for solid ethical reasons, but then perhaps as an employee through the years you've been asked to do things that aren't ethical and things that you have felt I don't know if that's right. I mean, not disclosing that information, not reporting that, signing my name to something, just a whole range of things. But now you know that these are ethical matters. The word moral before was kind of maybe a neutral word for you. It might have just been a slogan for, yes, we should just do the right thing. But without really thinking about what is the right thing and how can I know that it is to be universalized. This is not just the right thing for me, but it's the right thing for everyone. So we want to talk about then when I mentioned the in vitro and I mentioned the creation of embryos, but then you have the fact that here are embryos, and what do we do with those embryos? And so one possibility then was, well, maybe we can harvest them for stem cells. You get the idea when you hear the word harvest, you, in other words, have to destroy them. Destroy the embryo so you can harvest from them what are called embryonic stem cells. And I can get into the science of that just a little bit as we move along. But then there are what are called adult stem cells that don't involve embryos. at all. And this has been the debate through the years. Whether it is moral to actually destroy embryo. Now you can imagine if abortion's the law of the land, depending then on whether we have a pro-life president or not, will determine generally whether there's a moratorium on embryonic stem cell research or whether that moratorium then is lifted. These are things that you don't hear about. They're not widely put out there in the news. Nobody's going to say, today there was a moratorium placed on this. Today that was lifted. No, these are things that are done by fiat. These are things that are done by executive order, the signing of a pen. And a lot of times you actually don't realize what's going on in this nation. You think, well, I can Google how many abortions were there in the United States, and you'll find out, and give or take, depending on if it's the CDC you're getting the source from, or if it's the Guttmacher Institute or things, that the numbers will range, and you'll get a number. But you don't really realize all of the other reproductive kind of technology things that are being done where life is at risk and where life is being destroyed, for sure. So I want to talk a little bit about this here at the outset, and then I'll sort of give the big picture somewhat right now. Then I'm going to hit the stop button and go grab some other notes that will be a little bit more technical. I was going to use a fairly technical PowerPoint that I've uploaded, and you'll see it with a whole bunch of notes, right? And I've uploaded that PowerPoint, so you can take a look at it, and it basically will just, all it does is going to give pictures. For what I'm going to say, it's going to give pictures. This is what a blastocyst look like. This is the inside the embryo and how they harvest this and what this is, but I just felt it's better, maybe to do this than to show that, but you certainly can avail yourself any of those research. But I want to take what I think are pretty good notes. I've also included from the, I think it's what's called the CMDA, the Christian Medical Dental Association. I'll tell you, if you go to that website, if you're still saying, Dr. Blanc, your lectures are a little bit limited on a lot of this subject. Obviously, we're not getting into the complete depths of it, and the book is kind of limited, and it's an introductory course. But this website is an excellent website. What it does is this is an organization of Christian medical doctors, Christian dentists, people that deal in the science of a lot of these things, what's ethical, what's unethical. So it is a way for Christian medical doctors and dentists to maintain solid Christian biblical, it's a solid biblical ethical approach to science and to their own discipline of medicine and dentistry. Now in that, I uploaded this for you, and you'll see somehow, down below the video, you'll see down or above, wherever I put this, I never can remember, you'll see a table or a listing of these files, and one of them is just this, a CMDA position paper. I think it's what it's called, a position paper. So don't let that be so imposing to you, but it's going to go through all of these sort of bioethical issues. So if you're still like saying, well, Dr. Blanc, I'm still not sure, I know where I stand on abortion, we all do, right? We know, but I just want to be able to articulate, like if I'm dealing with a non-believer, and sadly to say, even in the church, this can become an issue, but And if I deal with a non-believer and I just hold up my Bible and I start quoting chapter and verse and I go to Psalm 139 and I make the case that, or even from Jeremiah chapter 1, that God knew me before I was even conceived. So life begins in the mind of God. But then how we're knit together in the womb in the 139. And see, so I get all that, but I said if a person doesn't believe the Bible, how do I talk to them ethically, about these things? And I think they're going to give you some help some little bit more depth to these issues. So hopefully that will help you. I just say continue studying this. Continue being interested in ethics, because it's a great way to put your. I found in a secular class, so 15 years of teaching at a community college just a few miles over the hill here, and so I thought, what a great way to inject myself into higher education and a lot of the young people and mid-career people, adults that would be consumers of programs at that community college. And one of the required courses was ethics. And, I taught philosophy there, I taught ethics, and I taught especially comparative religion, taught that for a number of years as well. But ethics. And I found that you'd think in comparative religion you'd be able to really put your Christianity, and you can really separate Jesus from all the nonsense that goes on sometimes within the Christian community, and really put Jesus front and center, which I thought that was so helpful. Yet it's ethics. It's ethics that leaves people wondering, but why is that good? It just seems to me that's the right thing to do, but I don't know why. Why is it the right thing? And just wonderful discussions that we would have. But let's talk a little bit stem cell and just prime the pump here with medical breakthroughs. The difference between, well, not the difference, but the association between medical breakthroughs and ethical choices. So you'll see in the media, how the latest scientific breakthrough, and you need to step back and say, but how did they make that breakthrough? Where did they get the material? And especially when it comes to things like stem cell research. But this one is just loaded with all types of ethical permutations, if I could use that word. One article recently published, and this is like November 2019, has basically this quote. So here's an article that you're reading, and you're saying, gee, I wonder what embryonic, not just stem cell research, but what embryonic stem cell research would be. And